That day, it was Lin Zilei who hugged him. If it's not his, who else can it? Ha Shuetian's heart was in intense pain. If she had come to look for her on the day of the accident, she would not have been so pathetic now. But that expression was in Tong Zhenbai's eyes. It was He Xiantian who was tacitly admitting, and he laughed coldly. She's very young, you know what? He Xiantian spoke loudly. His eyes were slightly red. He knew what Tong Zhenbai was trying to say. It was definitely nothing but a few sentences. Lin Zilei didn't know how to self-respect. Just at that age she was pregnant, her life was really indecent. But did he know what she had to go through? He Xiantian looked at Tong Zhenbai from head to toe, a luxury suit on the other brother's body, only afraid of being equal to the one-year salary of ordinary people. You are a rich family like you. Can you understand the life of a poor family? Do you know the feelings of people who don't have rice to eat? Knowing the scene of being forced to the end, is there no other way? I don't know. I don't know how she has to live to this day. Lin Zilei clung to He Xiantian, and then shook her head at him. She didn't need anyone to sympathize. She didn't need anyone to pity. She just wanted to try to live well. It was enough to take good care of her mother and the baby in her womb. You take me to the hospital. She was about to lose her footing anymore. Okay. He Xiantian bent over and hugged her. Lin Zilei looked at Tong Zhenbai, who was standing stunned. Seemingly a little unexpected, she said to him, I'm sorry, I can't help but go to work, but you can rest assured, I will definitely not let others know the relationship between me and you, and I will not make you lose face. Tong Zhenbai frowned. There was a slight ripple flashing in his eyes, and then he glanced at her face. This girl. Outsiders don't know Lin Zilei's situation at this time, but He Qian, who is hugging her, knows very well. Now her whole body is trembling endlessly. Seeing this, He Xiantian hurriedly carried her into the car, and then comforted. Don't be afraid, don't bleed, it'll be okay. He Xiantian used the fastest speed and drove her to the hospital. Tong Zhenbai stared at the car that had gone away, and in his mind he was still remembering what He Xiantian had just said. After all, what secret is there on Lin Zilei? It is true that she has a lot of unusual behavior. Because he wanted to understand what it was like, he picked up the phone and called Quang Qin. Let's investigate a little about Lin Zilei. Investigate her what? Everything. After speaking, Tong Zhenbai hung up the phone immediately. Bye. Qin Lujie ran out of the restaurant, approached and pulled his arm. Are you still angry with me because you didn't let Lin Zilei come to the company to work? I know I'm wrong, it's just because I love you too much. No, let's go home. His voice was normal, without any unusual ups and downs, total, concealing his mood so well that no one can see through. Qin Lujie felt very worried. Who did you call just now? In hospitals. Lin Zilei was taken into the operating room. He Xiantian stood outside waiting. The waiting time always made people uncomfortable, and he occasionally looked at the operating room. About an hour later, the door of the operating room opened, and when Lin Zilei was pushed out, He Xiantian hurriedly ran over. How is she? The doctor took off his mask and said, Because I was too tired, there were signs of premature birth. It's okay now, I have to get enough rest. Otherwise I won't be so lucky next time. I know. He Xiantian pushed her to the hospital room. Lin Zilei looked at He Xiantian, and then said very sincerely, Thank you, I help you every time. Helping her every time when she needed help. I'm fine. Ha Qian still had the same gentle smile on his face. You paid the hospital money in advance for me, right? I owe you first. Lin Zilei opened his dry lips and said a few words. There's no need to talk about those things now, you have to rest well. Ha Qian didn't like her to be so polite to him. Entering the hospital room, Lin Zilei looked at him. Call your mother here. She didn't want to create more trouble for Ha Shuetian. Ha Shuetian thought that she was missing Trang Kaiyu. After all, when she was a weak person, she always wanted to have relatives by her side. He picked up the phone and called Zhang Kaiwei, told her that Lin Zilei was in the hospital, and then told her to come here with her. After Zhang Kaiwei finished listening, he said in fear, Zilei, what's wrong? It's no big deal, just rest, she wants to see you. At this time, Zhang Kaiwei let out a breath gently. Then she used the fastest speed to go to the hospital. When Zhang Kaiwei came, Lin Zilei told He Xiantian to go first. That's right, I'm bothering you again. Trang Kaiyu looked very sad. It's okay, so I'll go home today, and I'll come to visit you tomorrow. He Xiantian looked at her. Rest well. Yes. As soon as he Xintian left, Zhang Kaiwa sat down right next to the bed, covered her with a blanket. Do you want to eat anything? Lin Zilei shook his head. His expression was a little not very good. Seeing this, Trang Kaiyu was very uncomfortable in her heart. Originally, I could have had a very good future, but because of my mother I couldn't go to school now. Thinking of the baby in her womb, Zhang Kaiwa's heart felt uncomfortable pain. Tell me, I got pregnant while I was in country. If I give birth to a blonde with blue eyes, what should I do now? Trang Ka Noyet was worried that the man that night was a local resident. No matter who he is, this is still my child, and he is also my grandson. Lin Zilei wouldn't try to think about that night, because it wasn't good for her. Water. Tong Jinbai went to the hospital to visit Lin Zilei. He was about to knock on the door, when he saw Zhang Kaiwa talking to her inside, so he didn't disturb the two of them. Yes, regardless of whether the baby is white or yellow, they are all my grandchildren. Trang Kaiyu also thought more openly. As long as her daughter was happy, she was willing to listen to her and take care of her. Perhaps this baby also had a destiny for her. Anyway, it was only once. Zhang Kaiyu touched her forehead, and couldn't help but feel sour in her heart. My daughter, you have to suffer with me. She hasn't given up her pregnancy yet? More and more, Tong Jinbai felt that she was very confused. That day in the hospital, it was clear that she had entered the operating room. The two of them were still talking, and it was not convenient for him to go in there to disturb him, so he turned around and walked away. As soon as he arrived at the door of the hospital, the phone in his pocket rang. He took out his phone and saw the name displayed as Kwang Kin calling. He picked up the phone. The matter you told me to investigate has already been investigated. Tong Jinbai lowered his head slightly, and at this time, his perfect jawbone suddenly became incomprehensible, and he gently spat out a word. Speak. 8 years ago, Lin Yuanzhong and Zhang Kaiwa divorced, and then took her mother and daughter to Country A to live, and they haven't come back for 8 years, and it wasn't until recently that they were picked up by Lin Yuanzhong. Tong Jinbai frowned. This is why she knows the language of Country A, because she used to live there. That's all. Obviously, these things alone were not enough for him to be satisfied. Guangqing's voice was a little hesitant, and then he opened his mouth again and continued. After Zhang Kaiwa was brought to Country A, he gave birth to another son, but the child was autistic, and his life was very poor. Moreover, when they returned home, the child had already been killed in a car accident. Tong Jinbai frowned. Her face became even more gloomy. Last time there was a look of pain in her eyes. Was it because of her brother? Then the baby in her womb. Is it over? Has any man ever appeared next to her? No. Only one psychiatrist is a little bit close to her. Kwang Kin carefully reviewed the document passed down by the other investigator. There is no one left. I never loved anyone when I went to school, and I was not close to any boyfriends. In other words, the baby in her womb was likely the psychiatrist's. She was picked up by Lin Yuanzhong because of her engagement with him, to force her to get married. The reason why she needed such money was because when she lived in country, her life was too poor, so she asked for money when translating documents for him, and even went to the restaurant to work to earn money. Thinking like this, Tong Jinbai felt that he had understood all kinds of Lin Zilei's strange expressions. At the same time, he also understood the meaning of Ha Xuantian's words. His mood was a little more complicated. He turned his head to take a look, then took off and walked down the stairs, getting in the car and leaving the hospital. In hospitals, Lin Zilei hadn't eaten rice this afternoon, so he was a little hungry at this time. Mom, I want to eat sweet mixed sticky rice. Suddenly, Lin Zilei wanted to eat sweets. Trang Kaiyu is a person who has experienced. She knows that when pregnant women are often picky eaters, they like to eat foods with strange tastes. The ancients used to say, sour and sour boys, I don't know if you are pregnant with a boy or a girl. Let me cook for you. Trang Kaiyu stood up, but was afraid that she was alone in the hospital with no one to take care of her. Lin Zilei seemed to realize her mother's worries, so she smiled and said to her, You're fine, the doctor said you just need to rest well. If she wasn't afraid that the baby in her womb was not good, then she basically didn't want to be in the hospital. Trang Kaiyu nodded slightly. She told her to rest well, and then leave the hospital room. As soon as she got out of the car, Trang Kaiyu was running towards the apartment complex, when she was suddenly stopped by several women in the middle of the road. These people all live here. Although she had only been here for a long time, she had no conflict with anyone. Zhang Kaiwei frowned. What are you guys going to do? Your daughter is not married but has children? Healing the wilderness, right? The first person to open her mouth was a chubby middle-aged woman. She was right next to Zhang Jiue's house. Normally, your mother and daughter are not so bad. I didn't expect your daughter to be that kind of person. Didn't you say that your daughter was only 18 years old last time? The fat woman put her hands on her hips, and her appearance was intimidating. Zhang Kaiwei's face turned blue and white, and her voice trembled. Grandma, who do you hear talking about? Are we wrong? Is your daughter actually not pregnant? Zhang Kaiwei's hands trembled slightly. Yes, her daughter was pregnant. It's really shameless. That's right, when she was so young she seduced men. She looked innocent on the outside, but it turned out to be a sloppy thing. That's right. Those innocent looks are all pretending to be seen, and behind their backs they're doing some dirty tricks. Shut up, who told you? Trang Kaiyu was angry, making her usual gentle face distorted. If you dare to do it, don't be afraid of what others will say. Zhang Kaiwei put her hand on her chest that was heaving with anger, and she solemnly explained on behalf of her daughter. My daughter is not the kind of person you say. She felt like her heart was about to be torn apart by someone else. Her daughter was not that kind of person. Why harm her like that? Isn't it? So why is it that you're only 18 years old and you're in the wilderness? Zhang Kaiyu choked on her words. The story of Lin Zilei's pregnancy was indeed true. She knew that being unmarried and having children would make others point at her. But she didn't expect that those people would criticize and curse so fiercely. Get out of the way. Zhang Kaiwei pushed them away, and then quickly walked into the apartment complex. Although she was very upset by what they had just said, when she thought of her daughter who was still in the hospital, she tried to suppress that unhappy feeling to go cook rice for her daughter. She thought that she had hid it very well, but when she brought the rice to the hospital, she still recognized her. Mom, the look on your face. Mom, it's okay. Trang Kaiyu didn't want her daughter to know that she had heard those words today. Lin Zilei stared at Zhang Kaiwei, who was deliberately avoiding her face. She didn't know how to lie, and every time she lied, she wouldn't dare to look into other people's eyes. It was easy to see that she was lying. Lin Zilei didn't expose it, but reached out to take the sweet sticky rice she gave her. It was obviously very sweet, but she didn't feel it, she just felt pain. She lowered her eyes. Mom, I can be discharged from the hospital tomorrow. I'll go home to live with you for a few days. She thought that Trang Kaiyu's face was so pale, because she missed her brother. This is them of her mother's illness. Zhang Kaiwei was frightened, and resolutely refused. No. If you let her hear those words, I don't know how uncomfortable she will be in her heart. Lin Zilei frowned. Mother. I heard it. Zhang Kaiwei looked serious. Whether it's a transaction or something else, now that you're a member of the Tong family, you have to stay there. Zhang Kaiwei's reaction was too unusual, making Lin Zilei not want to think too much. She didn't show her teeth, she seemed to have lost her sense of taste in her mouth, only eating and drinking for the baby in her belly. That night, she tossed and turned and couldn't sleep. Then it was almost morning, she slowly fell asleep a little, but it was only a moment before she woke up very quickly. The next morning, Ha Xiantian went to the hospital, and Trang Kaiyu went home to cook rice for her. Waiting for Zhang Kaiwei to come out of the hospital room, Lin Zilei also got off the bed. He Xiantian saw this and ran to help her. She raised her head and looked at He Xiantian. I feel that my mother is hiding something from me. What's the matter? He Xiantian asked. I don't know, so I want to find out clearly. She paused for a while. I want to ask you to help me with something. Tell me. I want to follow her. She had to find out why she didn't want her to come back to live with her. In the past, it was clear that Zhang Kaiyu had said, hoping that she would go back to her home, so it would be more convenient for her to take care of her. However, yesterday she reacted so violently. Obviously not normal. Now that she had only one relative, her mother, she couldn't let her quietly endure things she didn't know. On the way, she was very calm. When she arrived at the Trang Kaiyu apartment complex, she got off the car and went into the house. Lin Zilei also followed. Coming out of the elevator, Lin Zilei saw right on the door of the room, on the wall where her mother and daughter lived. There was no place that was not written with insulting words, scolding, shameless thing, stuff without husband. There is also a sneeze of oil. Zhang Kaiwa stood in front of the door. She was so angry that she trembled, and then her whole body leaned over and fell to the ground. Mom! Xiantian took off and walked over, helping Zhang Kaiwa who was falling. Take it to the hospital first. She was obviously struck by the words on the other wall. Lin Zilei choked up and said, yes. Since her brother passed away, adding the sequelae of the car accident, her health has been very weak. Surely when she saw these things she would be very angry. She suddenly fainted, which made Lin Zilei extremely worried. Page Ka Yu was taken to the emergency room. Lin Zilei stood at the door. His whole body seemed to have lost his soul. Xiantian walked over and hugged her shoulder and comforted her slightly. Don't worry too much. When Tong Jinbai arrived home, he realized that Lin Zilei hadn't come back yet. He thought she was still in the hospital, so he drove there. Perhaps it was because he knew Lin Zilei's unfortunate past, or because she was his wife, so he felt compassion for her in his heart. He went into the hospital room but didn't see her. When he went out, he saw the image of her and Haku Tian hugging each other in the corridor. He couldn't help but be angry in his heart, but even he didn't know why he was so angry. His voice was cold. Are you guys here showing off? This voice, even though they had only been together for a long time, Lin Zilei had just heard it and realized who this voice belonged to. She couldn't help but stiffen and turn her head. And he stood not far away, his expression deep and cold. Do you regard what I said last time as the wind in your ears? Lin Zilei instinctively avoided He Xuanqian's arms. Just now, because she was worried about Zhang Kaiwei, she didn't pay attention to physical contact with Ha Xianqian. Lin Zilei was just about to explain, but He Xianqian grabbed his wrist. He looked at Tong Jinbai. Your marriage is just a transaction according to each person's needs for a month. What reason do you have to interfere in her own affairs? He Qian knew everything about Lin Zilei, so he was heartbroken and mourned, so now he wanted to respect her and protect her. Tong Jinbai's eyes stared at Lin Zilei's wrist that was being held tightly by He Xianqian. A moment later, a cold laugh full of mockery came out in his throat. You let a woman who is pregnant with her child get married, and now you still count the guest voice to overwhelm the master's voice? The cold smile left on his lips suddenly disappeared. His eyes were as sharp as a sword, and he pressed straight forward, leaving no piece of armor for He Qian. Are you also counted as a man? Lin Zilei's heart suddenly tightened, and he was both embarrassed and angry. Unexpectedly, he thought that the child in his womb belonged to Ha Xueqian. She was grateful and respected He Qian. How could she dare to use her filth to slander him? She pulled out of He Xuanqian's hand that was holding her hand tightly, and looked at Tong Jinbai. If you want to tell me, just say it, please don't drag others in. Lin Zilei's protection was beyond Tong Jinbai's expectations, but in his eyes this was ridiculous and outrageous. Her identity is now his wife, showing love to another man right in front of him. For some reason, he was extremely angry in his heart. But He Qian said a very true sentence. Their marriage was a transaction. He had no qualification to criticize. It's just that he didn't want to see the scene of them together. If you still want the land in Tian Tui Bay, come find me. After he finished speaking, he turned around and walked quickly and left. Lin Zilei lost his mind for a few seconds. She didn't expect that she had decided to let go. He gave her another chance. This really has a great temptation for her. If she holds the right to trade that land, she has the advantage to discuss the conditions with Lin Yuanzhong, without being pressured by Lin Yuanzhong anymore. Lap lap. He Xianqian was a little worried. It seemed that Tong Jinbai's words had made her notice. Lin Zilei shook his head. I'm fine. After 20 minutes, Zhang Kaiwei was pushed out of the operating room. She was too angry to faint. Now that she only has one daughter left, she hears others insulting her daughter like that. And Zhang Kaiyu can't accept it in her heart. Moreover, for a moment she couldn't stand the things outside the door. The patient's blood qi is not circulating, she can't stand it. The family tries not to make her too emotional. After taking him to the hospital room, the doctor instructed. Lin Zilei nodded. Thank you, doctor. Lin Zilei knew that her brother's death had caused a great blow to her. If it weren't for me, I'm afraid that she would have followed her brother by then. She thought it would be better to let her mother leave that heartbreaking place, but she never thought that she would be killed for her affairs. It's just that there are not many people who know she is pregnant. Who did it? Furthermore, why should the person do so? What was their purpose? He Cho Chien saw her confident and walked over. We can't stay there anymore. I'll find you another place. Lin Zilei nodded slightly. That place really couldn't stay anymore so as not to get too emotional. I want to know who did these things. Lin Zilei always felt that this was not a coincidence that someone did it on purpose. I'll leave it to you. He Qiqian smiled. You are a brother, of course you are also my relative. Lin Zilei looked at He Xianqian and suddenly felt a bitter feeling in his nose. He treated her too well. She didn't know how to repay her. She slowly bowed her head, didn't say a word, just quietly deciding in her heart, waiting until she had the ability, she would definitely repay him. Now she really needed someone to help her find out clearly about this. Otherwise she would not be at ease. Even if they moved to a new place, who knows if someone might go out and do something deliberately killing Zhang Kaiyu? Thinking of Tong Junbai's words before leaving, Lin Zilei looked miserable. Ha Cho Chien thought that she was tired and said, You go back to rest, you already have me here. But I used to work at this hospital, I have my own office and resting place, and I can even take care of my mother. Lin Zilei looked at Zhang Kaiyu, who was still in a coma, hesitated for a moment before saying, Then if there is anything, you have to call me. Lin Zilei left his mobile phone number for He Xianqian before leaving the hospital. She returned to the villa, saw that there was only Wang's mother in the house, and she frowned. Isn't he at home? Wang's mother's eyes looked towards the office. He's in there. Lin Zilei changed his shoes and walked straight towards the office. She stood at the door, and it took a while to raise her hand to knock on the door. She knocked for a few hours and didn't see anyone answer, so she couldn't help but frown, turned the door handle and gently pushed the door open. I only saw Tong Junbai with his face up. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, not knowing if he was pretending to be asleep or really asleep. Lin Zilei slowly walked over, stood in front of the reading table and called out softly, Mr. Tong. Tong Junbai slowly raised his eyelids, looked at the woman standing in front of him. Everyone else called him General Manager Tong, Uncle Tong, the first time someone called him Sir. Lin Zilei held his hands together, his palms were covered in cold sweat. You said before. Can you give me the land in Tiantui Bay? Tong Junbai's eyes narrowed slightly, and the corners of his mouth curled up somewhat calculatingly. I'm a businessman, I don't do loss-making trades. Lin Zilei's mood immediately deteriorated. That's right, she was thinking fancifully. How could this man help her unconditionally? She had nothing, how could she exchange it for this land? I think this land is very useful to you. Tong Junbai found out that she wanted to retreat. Lin Yuanzhong took her and her mother to this country, living a bad life. Her younger brother died, and she naturally hated Lin Yuanzhong in her heart. Before, he thought that Lin Zilei wanted that piece of land to give to Lin Yuanzhong, but now it seems that it is not. It's just that I don't have anything to talk to you about. Lin Zilei wanted to get that piece of land. Tong Junbai raised his eyelids, and the corners of his eyes folded with a slight feeling of a mature man. You have. What? You. It took Lin Zilei a few seconds to react. Me. Tong Junbai stood up, walked forward and pressed closer. Lin Zilei instinctively stepped back. He grabbed her shoulder tightly. What are you backing off? I don't eat human flesh. Lin Zilei himself didn't know why he was afraid of him. He just always felt that he was not as calm as he seemed. Suddenly he smirked and smiled faintly. How is it? What did you do against your conscience so you don't dare to face me? Are you stunned? What did you do against your conscience? Lin Zilei raised his head. What do I have to worry about? Her chin was raised, and the heat hit the tip of Tong Junbai's nose, and this smell was a little familiar. He was innocent for a moment, and the next second grabbed her face, somewhat dangerously pressed closer. You are a married woman who has sex with another man is not keeping moral standards. Lin Zilei felt that he was confused. Didn't he also go back and forth with Qin Lujia? Moreover, she and He Chochin were not as close as he thought. Where did he interfere in his affairs? I don't care about you, and I hope you don't interfere in my private affairs. Before she could finish speaking, her lips were suddenly blocked. The words she wanted to say swirled around the tip of her tongue, and she was speechless. Ah! Lin Zilei reacted in time, pushing him away. Tong Junbai regained his senses and took a step back. He looked at the woman in front of him in disbelief. What did he just do? Qin Lujie was so proactive, he didn't even want to be close to her. But when he saw this woman's pink lips constantly closing open, his mind suddenly went blank for a short moment, and he couldn't help but do something that surprised him. Except for that night, Lin Zilei had never had such an intimate behavior with any man. She was embarrassed and shocked. Where do you rely on? Lin Zilei felt that she was violated. She was indeed selling herself, but she was definitely not an arbitrary woman. Where do you rely on? Tong Junbai turned around, turning his back to her. You are my wife. So whatever you do is not excessive. Lin Zilei rolled his eyes. Here. It was obvious that the old man was right. We are not husband and wife, we are just a transaction. Lin Zilei's voice also became trembling. She was afraid of having such intimate contact with men. That night was her nightmare. She rejected the intimate behavior between men and women. Lin Zilei was too indignant and didn't detect Tong Junbai's abnormality. His calmness were just pretending to show her. If Lin Zilei was calm enough, if he looked closely, he would find that Tong Junbai's ears were red. Even if it's a transaction, you didn't say that you can't have sex while being husband and wife? He slowly turned around and saw that Lin Zilei was almost depressed. He frowned. His kiss was not poisonous, why was it so depressing? Or did she want to keep the other man clean? He slowly walked over to her. A man who can't even protect the woman he likes well, what kind of man does he count? What does he have for you to love? What's worth keeping him clean? Lin Zilei didn't understand anything. What do you mean by this? Could it be that you mean He Qiu Qian? When Lin Zilei wanted to explain clearly, Tong Junbai regained his composure. He walked to the front of the table and sat down, leaning on the chair lazily but arbitrarily, one hand resting on the table. His expression was also extremely indifferent. It seemed that the intimate behavior had never happened before. I can give the land is in Tian Tui Bay, but... He paused for a moment before continuing. It's not giving. Lin Zilei clenched his hands, trying to make himself stop trembling. There were countless thoughts in her mind, and she finally forced down Tong Junbai's contemptuous behavior. She said calmly, "What do you want?" Tong Junbai drooped his eyelids and his voice wavered slightly. I haven't thought of it yet, I'll ask you again after thinking about it. I'm just afraid that this is the most provocative thing he's ever done since he was born. Unexpected. Don't be controlled by him. Lin Zilei pursed her lips. It was not easy for her to take those things back from Lin Yuanzhong's hands. If it is indeed possible to get the advantage of dealing with Lin Yuanzhong, of course it is better. It's just that. I won't make you kill the arsonist, nor will I tell you to do anything immoral. Tong Junbai seemed to see her worries, so he coaxed her. She hesitated for a moment before saying, Okay. You don't have anything now, what are you afraid of? If she could quickly steal those things back, she could take her mother out of this place and find a quiet place to live. I repeat again, when you are still in a relationship with me, you are not allowed to have any men. Just thinking of the image of her and Ha Xianqian hugging each other, there was naturally anger and sadness in his heart. There was no way to express it. Me and you can go out. She hadn't even spoken out of her mouth when she was interrupted by Tong Junbai. He didn't want to hear Lin Zilei talk about her and the other man. It sounds annoying. Lin Zilei's lips twitched, and he finally didn't say anything and turned to leave. At the moment when the door to the office was closed, all the calm look on Tong Junbai's face was gone. He is full of heart. Just now he was too excited, thinking of such a short kiss, but to make such a deep impression, his fingers slid over his lips, as if there was still her smell. An unconscious smile appeared on the corner of his lips. Even he himself couldn't feel that he was laughing. Obviously, the myth is attached again. Her lips, really very soft, very similar to Qin Lujie. It's just that after that night passed, he could no longer find the feeling that fascinated him on Qin Lujie's body. Could it be that my body at that time led to that? This feeling was really too strange. Lin Zilei came out of the office and didn't let him stay in the house. Her mother is still in the hospital, she has to be taken care of. She had just gone to the door just in time to meet Qin Lujie to the villa. Every time she saw her, she wore exquisite makeup, and her clothes hugged her beautiful and dignified clothes. "Do you want to go out?" Qin Lujie asked with a smile. Lin Zilei stopped and turned around, saw that Tang Zhenbai had released Qin Lujie, and walked towards her with heavy footsteps. The corners of his cold mouth pursed into a curve that hid sharpness, and involuntarily attacked her. "Sorry, Lujie." Lin Zilei didn't move, just looked at him coldly. "I won't apologize to her." Even though at this moment she was very afraid of him. But she was not wrong, it was Qin Lujie who wanted to push her first. She was just protecting herself, she was just an instinctive reaction. "Where did you make her apologize?" Tang Zhenbai's eyes looked at the fierce look on her face, and her eyelids were tightly furrowed. He had never carefully observed this woman, even if it was a moment of losing his mind kissing her. He didn't look at her closely. She was relatively thin, her small face was only the size of her hand, very delicate, and she showed a pure look, and at this time, her eyes were as bright as stars staring at him with a strong and determined look. The four eyes looked at each other, and no one would give in. "You pushed her, you have to apologize again." His voice was still cold but less sharp. It seemed that he was shocked by her expression. "I'm really fine. It's because I'm not careful. It's really not related to Miss Lin." Qin Lujie walked over quickly, interrupting the tug-of-war between the two. She pulled Tang Zhenbai's arm. "Bye." She looked at Tang Zhenbai and shook her head, her eyes were watering, she looked depressed but she tried to be patient. "Bye, just now it's because you can't stand up, maybe it's because you're wearing shoes that are too high, it really has nothing to do with Miss Lin." She tried her best to explain to Lin Zilei. Tang Zhenbai's eyelids drooped, looking at the high heels on her feet. It was indeed a bit high, but he could clearly see that Lin Zilei was pushing her. "What's going on?" "Bye, you may have twisted your leg just now, it hurts too much." Qin Lujie's beautiful face wrinkled. Unlike the usual dignified look, it looks a little cute. Tang Zhenbai raised his hand and pulled her tangled hairs behind his ears. This woman quietly followed him without asking for recompense, without crying, without causing difficulties. When he was poisoned and needed a woman, she did not hesitate to offer herself at all. Even though I had sex with her, she didn't beg for her name, and was still quietly by his side. At the same moment, Tang Zhenbai wanted to give her a title. "I don't love her, I don't love any woman, I don't believe in love. My mother died only a month ago, and my father married someone else. How could there be such a thing as love in this world? The myth is ridiculous. Are you stupid?" Qin Lujie leaned close to his lap. "As long as I can follow you, I will be satisfied with whatever I do. I don't feel stupid, I just feel very happy." Lin Zilei didn't have the heart to pay attention to them either. She turned her head and walked back the side of the big door. Qin Lujie looked at the shadow of Lin Zilei's back with the corner of his eye, and the corners of his mouth were slightly curved, not easy to recognize. Saying that, now she won't have time to stay in the villa with Tang Zhenbai? She thought that she was hiding her emotions very well, and she didn't know that it had caught Tang Zhenbai's eyes at all. But he didn't say or ask anything, but turned around and walked into the house. Qin Lujie quickly chased after him. "Bye." Tang Zhenbai turned his head, glanced at her casually, his gaze fell on her high heels again, and said with implications, "Don't wear shoes that are too high in the future, it's really not good to fall." After speaking, he walked towards the office. When he reached the door, he stopped. "I have work today, you go first." Before Qin Lujie had time to react, the door of the office was closed. She stood there looking down at the high heels on her feet. "What do you mean, do you care about me?" But it seemed to mean something else. Qin Lujie went up, wanting to knock on the door, but Wang's mother was already in front of her. "Didn't the boss have to tell you to come back?" Qin Lujie still knew that Wang's mother didn't like her. No matter how much she tried to win her heart, it didn't have a good effect. Ma Wang was not an ordinary maid, but a caregiver for Tang Zhenbai from childhood to adulthood. In front of Tang Zhenbai, she always had a little face. "Mother Wang, I just don't think he's in a very good mood, I just want to be with him more. I already have a mistress by his side. Miss Qin should still come here less in the future, so as not to be said to be a third party, which will be harmful to Miss Qin's honor." In the past, when Tang Zhenbai didn't marry Lin Zilei, Wang's mother didn't like Qin Lujie. But since Tong Jinbai married Lin Zilei, Qin Lujie returned, actively being close to Tong Jinbai like a third person. No one likes this kind of third person. Moreover, someone as old as Wang's mother was even more disgusting. The person Bai likes is me. He was not willing to marry the Lin family. You are the one who takes care of him from childhood to adulthood. Don't you hope he is happy? Qin Lujie tried to be patient but did not shout. She is a maid who relies on the old man here. It really makes people disgusted. I think at that time the mistress arranged this marriage for the boss after all. There was her own reason. The boss is married. Could it be that Miss Qin wants to interfere with other people's marriages and become the third person to ruin other people's marriages and be beaten by the person who calls them? Ma Vong said very affectionately, but there was no lack of politeness that should be had. She raised her hand towards Qin Lujie and signaled, "Miss Qin, please invite." Qin Lujie's hands on his side suddenly tightened, so angry that he trembled, but he couldn't let it go. He could only temporarily go ahead. As soon as Qin Lujie came out of the house, Wang's mother immediately closed the door.